welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. In the space that we're in, so we use standard-driven projects, we use open source code projects, and everything that we're doing is really to avoid vendor lock-in, right? And so we really view digital identity as being a public good. And if it is a public good, then you shouldn't be locked into a specific company. And there's so many examples of either like companies going out of business and then you kind of lose your data or the value that you had out of that to use within a certain ecosystem. And also if as a consumer, if I find a better alternative, I can't really port my data over. So interoperability is really a vital aspect of being able to provide sovereignty, both for individuals, but even for governments as well. It's quite important. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of focus on that. So when we talk about interoperability and the importance of interoperability, I feel like there's often a lot of conversations just on the technical lens of things, which are quite important, but there's a lot more lenses to look at when we're talking about interoperability. So how do you look at this broad concept of interoperability within digital identity, and what are maybe some other lenses outside of technology, and why are they important to look at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, definitely interoperability is like, on the conceptual level, really important, because if you don't have interoperability, you basically don't have decentralization. So what it does, it's like, some definition of APIs, and interoperability could be that I speak the same language. So we speak English today. So it's a way of interoperability if you want so, right? But I think there's also, on the governance level, there's interoperability. When you exchange data, which data you exchange, how, etc. When it comes to storage or storing information on the ledger, I think it's a lot about governance and how we implement things, and technology obviously is at the core, but then pretty much, or pretty important but not yet resolved topic is the governance aspect and the trust frameworks, etc., etc. And that is, I think, where a lot of focus and energy and research goes into at this moment.
So if we look at like business and legal and maybe legislation, that you bucket all of these things, I guess, within a governance framework, and I'd be interested to hear, based on your experience of what's happening in the EU, particularly, kind of some learnings or thoughts, or just update on what's going on the governance framework there, if you can.
So there's like governance that people, on the libertarian side see, it's technical governance, and that you govern it by smart contract. But that obviously it's in stark contradiction to GDPR and other legal requirements in our realms. And then you have approaches where you have a kind of ledger that is tightly bound into contracts, legal contracts, but there is sometimes a tendency and the risk that it becomes a more federated approach, because it's like so protected that the idea and the openness of SSI is lost. And what I really feel is, first of all, possible, but secondly also necessary to enable SSI, is that we have a more, that we think of governance can be implemented in different networks, and that can be a ledger, but it can be also a PKI or whatever you think of. And So yeah, I guess there's different approaches. Some are really carrying the risk that it will be not SSI, but it will turn more into a platform. And this, I think if we want to have self-sovereign identity also on a global perspective as a common infrastructure, we need to make sure that we have different networks. Because, I mean, yes, your question was like, how do we do it in Europe? But in general, we need to think in different layers. And so we need an infrastructure, a communications infrastructure that works for everyone on the globe. But then we live in different, on different continents, in different legislative areas, and there's different requirements. So there we need to have different trust frameworks, maybe even broken down into use cases or industries or, you name it. And this is, I think, where we need to put a lot of attention to in the upcoming year. Because again, if we go more towards a direction of making it super safe, secure, and with legal contracts and a closed system, why do we use then SSI? Or, I mean, we can actually not even name it SSI anymore.
It's something I think about a lot too, and there's, at least from kind of the existing world today, physical world where government kind of legislates and applies policies, that it is all about kind of it's the sovereign network model, right? It's just the permission model. Everyone could read, but to participate, it's kind of you have to go through governance, and it seems like it's a governments around the world seem to think that that's the proper type of solution for them to have this kind of permissioned environment. I start to wonder then too, like because there's other elements, right, to the whole stack, and then when you even start thinking about just wallets and stuff like that, and they're being treated a little differently throughout the world. Some governments are building their own wallets, and some governments are looking to just use public sector wallets and stuff like that. But it's just you wonder kind of like how much control is still being, like, it could still just become a closed system, like you're saying today, right? And isn't the idea that, like, yeah, like my government issued identity is a public good. Me being part of this country and paying taxes and being a law-abiding citizen, it's a right for me to get this, and it's a public good. But I shouldn't be prevented from using this elsewhere if I want to go to Ethereum or to a Web3 kind of ledger. I should be able to use that there as well. So I wonder kind of, I understand a lot of the focus on just they want to protect citizens and make it secure, but it's tough to kind of draw a fine line, right, of where you stop, because then you start kind of taking away from some of the opportunities for people to gain value elsewhere.
Yeah, I think when we put everything into one stack that just can, like, communicate with itself, so to say. So like one wallet can only communicate with this one ledger. That's really unfortunate setup in a way. And obviously the state, yeah, they have a rightful interest in that they are the ones to issue, these type of credentials like driver's license, passport, etc. But I think there's like a way of where this can be in a modular way plugged into each other. And this is like where interoperability kind of comes in, where, yeah, there can be trust frameworks and even ledgers or PKI systems that are basically under the control of the government, and that's fine. But if the wallet is bound to this system, that is like where the question comes into place: is that okay? Or like, I don't know, but I think you're aware of like that the European Union basically wants every nation state within the EU to issue a wallet in the course of 2023. And they give out different options. So they leave it up to the member states if they issue a state wallet, or if they do it via public-private ownership partnership, sorry, or if they just leave it up to the market to come up with wallets that provide this service. And I think that that's super tricky. In my view, a wallet should be a container, and it should be very neutral. Otherwise, it's not serving me. If I have a wallet that is tied to an agenda, or even control mechanisms, etc. So yeah, I think then we are moving closer to a model that might be, we might find this in China, and people are fine with this. But for Europe, I think it's very tricky. It becomes even more tricky if every nation does it in a different way. So what type of infrastructure are we building? And I'm not sure. I hope that there will be a lot more discussion around this. I mean, in Germany, we have like these SDI projects, Secure Digital Identity projects, that are funded by the German government. And there is like a separate track, which is like a research and development kind of project that tried to give guidance around these type of questions. But foremost, I think the public discussion around this is like so important, because right now it seems like we are on a track of fast decision making, and we have always recommended to postpone this because we are still learning about the technology. And if regulation jumps ahead of our full understanding of the technology and the dynamics, also the governance dynamics that unfold, that can backfire very quickly.
I really like your comparing a wallet to a container, and then thinking of it as just, you should, if you have ownership of that container, you should be able to stock it up with whatever you want, and that gives you the ability to participate in different ecosystems or in different scenarios with different entities. That's super cool. I do like, at the same time though, like if you're a government agency and you're issuing a digital driver's license to your citizens, you don't want to issue a wrong driver's license to a wrong person either, right? So there's a big element there of just a risk for them to manage as well. So I do understand a lot of the focus, and if you get into topics of just identity proofing and liveness testing and these kind of types of solutions that are employed to increase assurance that the person making a claim is actually that person, I totally understand why you would want to do that, right? So so it's a double-edged sword, I think, that you need these types of things, but then if you want to make it more modular and stuff like that, it's just does that just become a plugin, basically, that wallets that want to be able to accept that need to follow those policies? It's kind of a tricky situation.
Right. Yeah. So in the SDI project, there we basically follow the path to implement these type of identities, like driver's license or EID, not as a verifiable credential at this moment, but it really goes via the ISO standards, and there's like a third party with a high secure infrastructure behind it, and then we combine it with SSI credentials. And the vision of having an EID or a mobile driver's license as an SSI verifiable credential in your wallet might be still a bit in the future. And I think that's a good thing. So we are kind of trying to approach self-sovereign identity, and when it's not, because it's still like, early days. So if you start with the highest level of assurance, the highest trust level, that's not necessarily the best idea with the new technologies. So you want to slowly approach this and understand what are the attack vectors, et cetera, and then improve and just make it more robust. It's just, I think, a bit of common sense thinking. But again, also here, I think the open discussion always helps a lot, that people are aware and not jumping on something and then deciding it should go this way or that way. Because, self-sovereign identity today is already quite complex. And we cannot expect that anyone at this point has still the full picture of all the moving elements. And not only technical, but also legal and so forth. And then there's a combination of different systems, like, new decentralized tech, and then more the legacy systems. And we don't also jump from one technology to another from in a day or so. So it will be a process. And if we approach it as this and really try to understand how we can make this transition and also learn about the benefits, and that's a super important process.
Yeah, I think like having not gone live with these big programs quite yet, like there's no understanding of just second and third stream effects anyways of any of this stuff. And so it's interesting to hear, like you mentioned, the separate R&D track that's going on. That's what I feel is like, if you look at what's happening in the Web3 space, if we want to call it that, I think you and I, having been in that space, I used to just say crypto, but it's just kind of changed a little bit. But that space is quite exciting. I think there's a lot of momentum in decentralized identity in that space today. But that space is basically just a continuously ongoing R&D track that's just actually going live with projects, which is quite cool. Are you guys doing work in kind of the intersection between decentralized identity and the whole crypto world, and kind of what's exciting in that space? And do you think that space is moving quicker than kind of some of the stuff we're talking about in the public sector?
I think quicker in certain terms, but then again, we all know that, some of the projects, they appear quickly, but they mature slowly. So, and when we look at Ethereum and its limitations until today, it's quite amazing. Yes, they want to push, but they also, it's such a complex system to move to Ethereum 2.0, etc., and get scalability in there. And I don't know if you have come across the Time magazine articles that featured Vitalik a few weeks ago. And so he gives this one example of the unconditional income. How do you call it? Universal income. And so he initiated this project. I believe it was everyone can sign up and get $40 US or something.
Was it UBI or something?
Yeah. And so the transaction costs are so high that on Ethereum that people don't get much money out of this, right? So, and that's frustrating. Yeah, so, but again, to your question, so I guess when we started out with social link data at Lohkamp in 2014, 2015 at a research project, and then in 2016 we combined the social link data web ID with a Ethereum smart contract, and we learned like how different networks bring their own very own disadvantages, and that's how we understood like I as a user want to be independent of a backend, whether it's being Ethereum or anything else. But what I actually want is I don't want to care what, which service utilizes which network. I just want to be able to consume the service or benefit from it, right? And so why I'm saying this, I think we are not blockchain, like tied to any blockchain. And I think that would be also not in the interest of identity company like us. But it's also not to judge on us, if it's like, which backend should be there, because this ties back to the governance question, or like, what type of innovative service you want to provide. And it might work in one country, it might not work in another country. So there's so much complexity to it. But what the Web3 definitely needs is somehow the ability for people to manage their keys, because that's like kind of their entry point to any of these networks, right? And yeah, but still there's much to explore, and we support multiple DID methods basically that can communicate to different Web3 projects. And yeah, I think it's great what happens there. What personally, so besides from Lohkamp, but personally being also like in Berlin, the community, like seeing all the projects, how this sector has self-financed itself and was, because of that, able to push innovation in like really unconventional ways. Whether they really turn in the end to be useful or not, it's not always necessarily the actual value that they bring. But being able to put so many resources behind experimentation and developing innovation, I think that's quite fascinating. And I don't know if that has happened in that way before in history. So I think that's yeah, fascinating.
I think it's an R&D track just at scale, and it's just like even if not 99% of projects fail, like you're going to get incredible innovation out of it. And so it's just, I think that the whole space is like far too deep in right now that this stuff is just going to keep exponentially accelerating. Yeah, like when I mentioned the vendor lock-in at the start of the conversation too. I think there's a lot of confusion often too, where people are so tied to a specific blockchain, just maybe because they have financial interest in it or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a lot of confusion between just the concept of decentralization, that like people think blockchains are decentralized, but they don't realize at times that you're tying to a platform once again, right? It's just the decentralization is on another aspect of things.
Right.
But yeah, and I am seeing a lot more. I guess it's been some years now that there's a lot of interest in decentralized identity, and I just use Ethereum, but we could talk about just the general space. There's been a lot of projects for a while, but it seems like like NFTs are just bringing a lot more conversation around identity, not necessarily in the right way, because it's not the right tool to do a lot of things, but it's to your point that a lot of projects are going to fail, but it doesn't matter. But NFTs seem to be, we could think what we want about where we are in the cycle right now, but they are bringing a ton of attention to just credentialing and identities and stuff like that. Perhaps not in the right way, but it's moving people's thinking, I think, in what's possible in the decentralized space.
I absolutely agree, and at the same time, it's we see like really more and more concern that it's diverting into ways where I would say, I don't want to judge this really, but because again, like I see it more like the innovation that can be enabled through these type of experiments. But on the other side, obviously, as like, you know, being a more responsible person, or if you want to be a more responsible person, there needs to be mentioned some critique, you know, that the tricky part is that people get in there on the expectations that this is real value, which is not, right? Like, and the, to suggest that an NFT is like worth millions, you know, for a few people, they can sell NFT for a crazy amount, but the large amount of users cannot. Nobody wants to take on their NFT. So I think the hype tries to paint a picture on NFT, which is not achievable by the individual. And that is, I would say, very problematic thing. And then again, there's also like different projects that want even to tie SSI to NFTs, and instead of verifiable credentials in many cases, and they say it's way better. And I think they need to think through a bit more.
Like what I'm seeing, so I totally agree with there's obviously a lack of privacy, 100% there. And it's just, I guess you just need to understand like what properties are very valuable in kind of a permissionless blockchain and what you would use it for. But I think the property of privacy is not there, but it's for a reason not there, right? So then there's certain things that it's good for and certain things that it's not good for. I also like people are trying to tie badges and credentials and stuff like that to NFTs, but like NFTs are transferable, and these types of things should be bound to a specific entity. And so that's kind of, and then you start seeing, okay, no, we're going to make kind of locked NFTs, and it just starts to be like you're using the wrong tool to accomplish what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I agree. Like, especially like ticketing or any whatever you issue, that it should be bound to an individual. Like, let's think like, you know, access rights to a company or whatever. You really want to make sure that's bound to employees or guests that you want to have in the house, and not like issue NFTs and then be surprised who comes the next day, right? So,
but it feels, I think, for us, it feels very similar to like the 2017 hype. It wasn't around NFTs, but it's a similar thing where like literally everyone is trying to force everything onto a specific tool, and it's just now it's rebranded. It was existent back then, but now it's just rebranded as something more mainstream and cooler. So it's quite interesting. And another thing, so you mentioned earlier in the conversation about kind of one of the biggest challenges is just about managing keys, right? For wallets. Seems like there's a lot of similarities. There are some differences, obviously. I have to explain sometimes what the difference is between a crypto wallet and kind of a credentialing wallet or an SSI wallet, but there are some similarities there as well. Are there certain learnings or opportunities that the SSI space has by just looking at how the crypto wallet providers have been kind of managing security and keys and stuff like that? Like, are there learnings that we could take from there?
I mean, the whole concept of a wallet. So I mentioned before, like we were initially working with social link data, and we had an application, and we called it actually a social graph, because it was like, you know, how you relate all your different types of information or data pieces together and give access to other people and share it with them. But then when we combined it with the Ethereum and the smart contract, Ethereum smart contract, then we decided at one point to split this application, and we were thinking like, you know, what would be actually a good metaphor? And I said like, well, actually, I think a wallet is like really the best metaphor, because everyone can relate to what's in a wallet. And then back then we were sharing offices with Ethereum dev team here in Berlin, and the crypto crowd was not very amused that we would like to pick up the term wallet for yeah, like also controlling your data. For them, it was like, no, wallet is ours, right? It's like just to manage your keys so you can basically control your Bitcoin or Ether or whatever. And then I said like, okay, let's call it smart wallet. And that's why Yolocom was called Yolocom Smart Wallet. That, yeah, you could manage your keys to control Bitcoin or Ether, but you can do so much more with this. And so I think the whole concept of the wallet from our perspective really comes from the crypto world. And yeah, not vice versa, or I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's like where for us the inspiration actually came from. And yeah, when I think back, like yeah, most other projects, they just named the application somehow, like the Uport app or whatever, but the term wallet only picked up later 2017 or 2018 or whatever.
Do crypto wallets and smart wallets or SSI wallets look at like backup and recovery the same way? I think when, and I think it's become a little more acceptable now, where like if I have a crypto wallet and you have like your seed phrase, or you have different ways of kind of recovering your keys. At like some years ago, it felt kind of a cumbersome process, because that's not kind of the way that if I lose my phone, or if I want to regain access to an account, it's very easy to do so, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of an additional step of security. But are SSI wallets, like moving forward, going to have to employ that similar type of key recovery? And beyond keys, when you look at actual like your data, your credentials and stuff that are stored on there, how daunting of a task is it? And actually beyond the technical task to actually do it properly, if you want to do backup and recovery and syncing across devices and stuff like that, but even like just the user experience around it is an interesting aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's not solved yet, and it will be super important to solve this in a way that it becomes like a no-brainer for individuals. I think everyone who has had wallets at one point lost their seed phrase. Sometimes this can be very painful. And yeah, I don't think it's the usability is something that can scale or is made for adoption. So we need something different. And the same thing for backup. So how can you back up your data? And obviously, I mean, some people talk about like a backup service that is a business that does this job. So you would have some sort of re-centralization. A more decentralized way would be that, I don't know, maybe if it's a service, then at least that they use a system like Filecoin, where data is sharded and then just spread out over the system. And you as a user has basically with your keys the sole accessibility to the data. Yeah, I think that's, so for us, it's on super high on the priority list, and we have it on our to-do list. We have implemented a few proof of concepts, and even last year within the European SF lab, we worked on a universal backup service, but it's still a proof of concept. So yeah, so these things need to be solved, recovery and backup, and but it's also I think it's not necessarily something you only solve as a company like Lohkamp, but you, like in the German SDI project, we really work also across consortia around this, and obviously make sure that we share our learnings. And yeah, at DIF there's working groups where they discuss it. I think at IIW, by the way, coming up in a few weeks, end of the month, basically. This has been a topic a couple of times already.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it already is, but it needs to continue being that, like, a community effort and becoming more of a standard. And I guess the different, whether you're working from kind of the digital first side of things, Web3, or whether you're a government kind of investing and need to invest in the security and stuff like that, I think it definitely sounds like it needs to become more of a standard globally, or at least have different options that are standardized. So when you talk about your smart wallet, I like the term smart in front of that, because at a certain point, and we're still at a point in the SSI space where it's very simple, right? My wallet is a container, and that's it. I just store stuff in there and I use it as I wish. But what seems quite exciting moving forward, and where I think there'll be a lot of innovation and value created for companies that want to invest in this, is like the smart agents, right? So the things that are able to actually take your containers or take your data on behalf of you and put it to work for you. Is this an area that you think about a lot, or have any thoughts about kind of where it's going, and maybe where some near-term innovation could happen inside of the agent to make it less of a dumb agent, but more of a smart agent?
I think there's some thinking and ideation around that. I also think it's still a bit far out, but I mean, there's thinking also around, like, I don't know if you want to call it artificial intelligence, but somehow some support for users to actually handle and manage all their data and transactions. Because, yeah, when we envision or look at all the use cases out there and the growing complexity, so I, as a user, cannot and don't want to manage every single transaction. But then, like, if you have something that will help you with this, then obviously it should be not biased and not contain an agenda. So if a company builds some smart whatever that helps you to improve your user experience, then this becomes super, super tricky because the more transactions, the more dense the data is about you becomes, the more closer it becomes to you. The privacy concerns are just super, super significant, and no answer, mostly concern actually, and that we really need to make people aware that there's high risk that we need to pay attention to.
But you do bring a very interesting point though about and there's a lot of conversations just happening on the web about a similar topic today of just like the algorithm, right? And I don't know if it's been all over Twitter over the past days that Elon Musk is now on the board of Twitter and has acquired a stake in the company, and they're looking to democratize the social media because again it should be a public good, and it should be an instrument of free speech and stuff like that. And then so there's a lot of joking around Twitter engineers scrambling to fix elements of the algorithm before kind of showing it. But I see it as something similar then, and especially if you're deploying an algorithm to act on your behalf and have access to so much critical data that could cause a lot of risk for you if something goes wrong. It seems like just like the standards and the open source technology that we're using just for the infrastructure of SSI, enhancing kind of the agent or making smart agents or putting intelligence in there, it seems like it's something that has to be open source to succeed as well. So I wonder how far, at what point does it not become open source, or just that everything needs to continue being open source? And I'm sure we'll see companies over the next couple of years having these intelligent smart agents, but they probably won't go anywhere serious until they actually open up.
Yeah. So actually, interesting side note, like I think 3 years ago or so, Emmanuel Macron, like the French president, was pushing out a regulation around artificial intelligence that projects around artificial intelligence will be only funded by the government if they are open source. And also AI projects can only utilize public data if they are fully open source. So there's no way that either data or funding goes into any black box AI solutions. And I think that was a very good signal, but that doesn't mean that this issue is solved yet. So it's just like, fortunately, someone is aware, and there is like, a regulation out there, but how this will be dealt with in practice, we need to see. And even so it might be open source, then we always need to ask ourselves the question, how many people can actually then look into the code and understand what's going on. So there's the first step is there's auditability, but the second step is like, is it also practiced?
Yeah, there's there's so much to be figured out. Like you said, a lot of this is still in such early stages. It'll be interesting to see more and more experiments happen, and that's why again the Web3 space is just remains so interesting, because you could publicly see what all these experiments are and what's going on, and you have a view of everything. It's like an open window. You're just looking.
Yeah, I just hope that these experiments are made with machines, or like, with insignificant assets and not with humans. So
if we take a step out of here, just switching topics, just to wrap up our conversation here today, there's a lot of momentum in the digital identity space overall. It's not something that's new. It's just that there are certain kind of terms or stuff that have become hyped up again, just like NFTs are hyped up. Digital identity as a whole is just a very hyped up, call it industry or whatever it's becoming. But you have all sorts of different existing platforms or verticals, I would say, within the digital identity space, whether you're just looking at customer IAM systems or privileged access management systems or identity proofing, liveness, e-signature, biometric stuff. It's a pretty vibrant ecosystem that is continuing to grow, and a lot of money going into it. And each one of these verticals are on a different maturity kind of chart, right? Whereas like enterprise IAM is a lot further than liveness testing, for example, which are a lot further than SSI on kind of the maturity chart. Where do you see portable digital identities, which that's a way to explain what we're doing? How does that fit into kind of, how does it complement, how does it take away from what some of these things are doing? And would be interested, just based on kind of your exposure to all of this stuff. Do you see openness to adopt and tag SSI onto these things, or how does SSI play or compete against these existing verticals in the digital identity space?
Wow, that's a complex question, honestly. So let me approach it from a different angle. So I think from the beginning, when we started to build out, like, you know, our stack on self-sovereign identity, we did it together with partners and alongside of use cases. So the great benefit of this is that you don't come up, like, you know, with ideas, and you could connect it here and there and, you know, everywhere with all kinds of new stuff, but actually you're kind of guided by something that should provide usability and support a use case and the user experience of a use case. And that doesn't answer your question by, like, you know, kind of having a list, this is number 1, 2, and 3. But I think it's too early to say this because at this point, we don't know which use case will be the first one to pick up. So it really might be very use case specific, which other technologies will come up on this list on the top. And we probably, if we speak in a year or two, we could start and say, like, okay, here's, like, you know, a first few that look interesting. But even then, I think it will be too early, and we can only answer this question maybe like in 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, a lot of people that work in these different verticals are interested in self-sovereign identity. I talked to a lot of them. They're all trying to strategize how they could reap value from it. And a lot of these people are participating in various decentralized identity communities, whether if it's DIF or if it's Trust over IP, or even some of the standard bodies as well. So I think that there's a lot of interest in there. So as these conversations and communities continue, and you mentioned IW coming up at the end of the month, what are some of the more interesting topics that you're kind of participating in or contributing to or hearing being talked about right now in the self-sovereign identity space that are most important?
Yeah, I think it's like definitely revocation. It is secure wallets and secure elements, and these are some of the topics that are really important. Also, specifically in context with governments, the security issue in general. Interoperability is still there. Yes, these are, I think, the topics that will be around at IIW, but as you know, it's like an open space kind of thing, and it also lives from what discussion topics people bring to the event. So I'm really curious what if there are some surprises.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.